The tragic story of George Stinney Jr. Imagine being 14 years old, too young to vote, too young to drive, too young to fully understand the world. Now imagine being sentenced to death. This is the story of George Stinney Jr., the youngest person executed in America in the 20th century, and what happened to him will leave you questioning everything about justice. Background: in 1944, George Stinney Jr. lived in a small home with a chicken coop in his hometown of Alkaloo, South Carolina, with his father, George Junius Stinney, his mother, Anne Brown Stinney, his brother, Charles Stinney, 12, and his sisters, Catherine Stinney, 10, and Anne Stinney Ruffler, 7. Stinney's father worked at the town sawmill, and the family resided in company housing. Alkaloo was a small, working-class mill town. White and black neighborhoods were separated by railroad tracks, which was common for small, southern towns of the time, given segregated schools and churches for white and black residents. There was limited interaction between them. But everything changed on March 23, 1944. That afternoon, two white girls, Betty June Binnicker, 11, and Mary Emma Tans, 7, rode their bicycles through town looking for flowers. Witnesses later said they had briefly spoken to George and his sister, asking where they could find maypops, a type of wild fruit. It was a short conversation, just children talking, but George never knew this would cost him his life. This is where it becomes tense. Sit down, grab your coffee, listen, and watch this video to the end, 'cause what I'm about to share with you is the greatest injustice in America history. But before we proceed, please click the subscribe button, like and share. The incident. On March 23, 1944, the bodies of Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Tans were found in a ditch on the African-American side of Alkaloo after the girls failed to return home the night before. George's father assisted in the search. The girls had been beaten with a weapon, variously reported as a piece of blunt metal or a railroad spike. Binnicker and Tans both suffered severe blunt force trauma, resulting in penetration of both girls' skulls, according to a report by the medical examiner. These wounds had been inflicted by a blunt instrument with a round head, about the size of a hammer. Medical examiner reported no evidence of sexual assault to the younger girl, though the genitalia of the older girl were slightly bruised. The girls were last seen riding their bicycles, looking for flowers. As they passed the Stinney's property, they stopped to ask George and his sister, Anne, if they knew where to find maypops, a local name for passion flowers. According to Anne, she was with George at the time. The police later established the murders occurred, according to an article reported by the Wire Services on March 24, 1944. The sheriff announced the arrest of George Stinney Jr. and stated that the boy had confessed and led officers to a hidden piece of iron. Investigation. George and his older half-brother, John, were arrested on suspicion of murdering the girls. John was released by police, but George was held in custody. He was not allowed to see his parents until after his trial and conviction. According to a handwritten statement, his arresting officer was H.S. Newman, a Clarendon County deputy, who stated, "I arrested a boy by the name of George Stinney. He then made a confession and told me where to find the piece of iron, about 15 inches where he said he put it in a ditch about 6 feet from the bicycle." Following Stinney's arrest, his father was fired from his job at the local sawmill, and the Stinney family had to immediately vacate their company housing. The family feared for their safety. Stinney's parents did not see him again before the trial. He had no support during his 81-day confinement and trial. He was detained at a jail in Columbia, 50 miles 80 kilometers from Alkaloo, due to the risk of lynching. Stinney was interrogated alone, without a counsel or even his parents. For hours, he was interrogated alone. Police later claimed he confessed, but there was no written confession, no recording, no signed statement, just their word. As rumors spread, white residents grew violent. George's family feared for their lives. His parents were forced to flee town, leaving George completely alone in jail. Imagine being a child, locked in a cell, separated from your family, accused of murder, in a town that already believed you were guilty. The trial, the entire proceeding against George Stinney, including jury selection, took place on April 24, 1944. Stinney's court-appointed counsel was Charles Plowden, a tax commissioner campaigning for election to local office. Plowden did not challenge the three police officers who testified that Stinney confessed to the two murders, nor did he try to defend Stinney. He also did not challenge the prosecution's presentation of two differing versions of Stinney's verbal confession. In one version, Stinney was attacked by the girls after he tried to help one girl who had fallen in the ditch, and he killed them in self-defense. In the other version, he had followed the girls, first attacking Mary Emma and then Betty June. There is no written record of Stinney's confession apart from Deputy Newman's statement. More than 1,000 white Americans crowded the courtroom, but no black Americans were allowed. As was typical at the time, Stinney was tried before an all-white jury in 1940. For most African Americans in the South were disenfranchised and therefore not present on the rolls of those available to serve on juries. After deliberating for less than 10 minutes, the jury found Stinney guilty of murder. Judge Philip H. Stoll sentenced Stinney to death by electrocution. There is no transcript of the trial, and no appeal was filed by Stinney's counsel. The entire trial lasted about 2 hours. Let that sink in. 2 hours to decide whether a 14-year-old boy should live or die. No real defense was presented. No witnesses were called on George's behalf. No strong cross-examinations. After only 10 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned guilty. He was sentenced to death in the electric chair. Stinney's family, churches, and the not appealed to Governor Olin D. Johnston for clemency. Given the age of the boy, some pleas from whites came with affirmations of white supremacy, but disgust over the prospect of someone so young being executed. Others urged the governor to let the execution proceed, which he did. He visited George Stinney in the death house 2 days before his execution. On June 14th, Johnston wrote a response to one appeal for clemency, stating, "I have just talked with the officer who made the arrest in this case. It may be interesting for you to know that Stinney killed the smaller girl to rape the larger one. Then he killed the larger girl and raped her dead body. 20 minutes later he returned and attempted to rape her again, but her body was too cold." All of this he admitted himself. It was reported that these were merely rumors, and Johnston's claims were not corroborated by the girls' autopsies. Between the time of Stinney's arrest and his execution, his parents were allowed to see him once after the trial, when he was held in the Columbia Penitentiary under the threat of lynching. They were not allowed to see him any other time. The execution. 83 days after his arrest, George was led into the execution chamber. Stinney was executed on Friday, June 16, 1944. At 7:30 a.m. he was prepared for execution by electric chair. He was so small, just 95 pounds, that the straps of the electric chair didn't fit him properly. Stinney was then restrained by his arms, legs, and body to the chair. An officer Stinney if he had any last words to say before the execution took place, but he only shook his head and said no. "Sir?" The executioner pulled a strap from the chair and placed it over Stinney's mouth. When the lethal electricity was applied, the mask covering slipped off, revealing that his eyes were wide open. He was 14 years old. When the switch was pulled, the child died in the electric chair. George Stinney Juror was buried in an unmarked grave at the Calvary Baptist Church Cemetery in Lee County, South Carolina. 70 years later, for decades, his case faded into history, but his family never stopped fighting. In 2014, 70 years after his death, a South Carolina judge reviewed the case. The court found that George had not received a fair trial. His constitutional rights had been violated. He had no proper defense, no due process. His conviction was officially overturned. The system admitted it failed him, but it was too late. If this story makes you terrified, subscribe for more hidden stories history tried to bury.